It's science.
Hello everybody, we're here with CBG Radio. This is your host Justin, and we don't need no goddamn sponsors. We're here to talk about nutrition, fitness, and everything else related. And we have a special guest on the podcast today, Nicole Woodard. She is a doctor of physical therapy with 11 years of experience, ranging from Division I athletics to Olympians, and of course her favorite, CrossFit and triathletes. She's an orthopedic specialist and runs a full wellness and telehealth practice. Nicole has been published in Impact Magazine and been featured in multiple podcasts and YouTube channels. She enjoys bringing her innovative practice model to others through mentorship in physical therapy, CrossFit gym, and triathlon club arena. She has sponsored several events, including local triathlons, ultra marathon events, and has culminated with a co-branded event, the Elite Experience with Power Branding LLC. The Elite Experience is an exclusive CrossFit sanctional and games recovery and social media coverage event for high-level athletes, and will be hitting the ride in June 2021 for Ride Across America. In addition to being a positive force in the physical therapy world, Nicole mainly enjoys spending time with her husband and son in their rural country home. She is also a recreational runner, triathlete, and CrossFit athlete, completing 4 70.3 distance triathlons, wow, and several half marathons and local CrossFit competitions. She loves spreading positive energy, personal development, and giving away books, and refocus bands with empowering messages. Wow. Nicole, how's it going today?
Great. Thank you so much. I'm like, it's always interesting sitting on the other side and hearing an introduction. I'm like, oh, wow, this is fun.
Yeah. Well, you did it for me, and I was kind of like just sitting there, this is strange, but yeah, I'm looking forward to obviously your podcast coming out on Foster Fit. And now we're here today to talk about mobility.
Yes, I am super excited just to share with your audience something that's obviously so passionate to me and some of the background. So I can't wait to dive into it.
I'm excited. We're like best cyber friends ever, as most people have made cyber friends during this pandemic. We've had the chance to become cyber friends, and maybe one day we'll meet. But for now, here we are.
I think for sure we're going to meet. I can't wait for the 2021 competition season. I have so many people that I am pumped to connect with. This past weekend in South Carolina, I got to hug some people for the very first time that I've been cyber friends with, and a couple of my athletes that I hadn't seen since January. It felt so good. So I can't wait to actually meet in person.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing, and it definitely makes you feel human again to be around people and be able to hug people and feel safe and everything like that. The CrossFit Games just happened this past weekend. Of course, it'll be 2 weeks past when this podcast gets released, but it seemed like, CrossFit was still able to put on a show when everything else is inevitably being canceled for the most part, especially as it pertains to sports. I mean, some people are bringing some things back and stuff like that. And obviously, we have that passion related in CrossFit and helping CrossFit athletes. And I want to give the audience some information about mobility specifically based on your background as a physical therapist. And I want to start first by asking you to define mobility, because I think people have, they synonymously use flexibility and mobility, rigidity, stability, all of them together. And then they assume that when they're doing something in the gym that they're doing one thing, but they're actually doing another. So what exactly is mobility to you?
So I really use the dictionary definition, honestly. I think it's best, and then I'll break it down so it makes sense to people and what terms they think. So the dictionary definition of mobility is the ability to move or to be moved freely and easily. So to me, what that means is that you have full flexibility. When I talk about flexibility, I'm talking about that your actual joints allow you to move in all the different positions the way that they're supposed to, and that your actual muscles are of proper length, that they also allow you to move in that direction. And then it also means that you have full stability, because the definition of mobility is that you can move freely and easily, not just that you can stretch freely and easily. And so then if you have the stability, which means that the actual nerves, the input back to your brain, all of the things are working together that says you actually can get down into a squat properly, and that you're able to use full muscle length and full joint range of motion, as well as your strength to actually get down into that position and get back up out of it. So I use mobility as a continuum rather than just, a lot of people, it's become this huge buzzword and people are just substituting it in essentially for stretching, or for stretching very quickly, meaning that, well, I'm doing mobility drills because I am going to hold this stretch position for 5 seconds. I'm going to come out of it. I'm going to go back in for 5 seconds and I'm going to come back out. But it's not a stretch because I'm not holding it for 30 seconds to 60 seconds. And I think it's just really muddied the waters. So I think of mobility is just that overbranching thing that then breaks out into, do you have flexibility and do you have stability?
Awesome. That's an incredible definition. I agree completely. I went to a FRC seminar, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago, and there was a dancer that they used as sort of someone to model the difference between mobility and flexibility. And they took her leg and put it almost completely over her head, and they held it there. They were like, this is her flexibility. And then they let her leg go and they said, hold it up as high as you can. And her leg obviously dropped down because she can't hold her leg right over her head without someone pushing against her leg. And when it came back down, they said that range is where she could hold her leg is her mobility. And I thought that was super interesting. I don't know if that's like sort of the same way that you really see it, but it obviously does at least have some of the same sort of values and incorporated in with the fact that it's not just a mechanical thing, but it's also sort of a neuromuscular thing, and everything sort of has to be lined up for her to hold her leg in that position versus someone actually assisting her.
Yes.
Like that,
exactly. Right? And, you know, another good one, especially our audiences, the people that are listening. So I will have people lay on their back and bring their knees up to their chest. So essentially you're just creating that squat position, laying down on your back. And then I'll have them squat down as low as they can. And even if I take the ankles out of it, even if I put their heels up on plates, they still can't reach full depth. But when they lay down on the mat, their actual hip joints and their glute muscles have enough range of motion that they can pull their knees fully up to their chest. So that tells me that they have the flexibility, but they don't have the motor patterning or the stability control to get into that position properly once their weight and their posture demands are on that. Another way is the complete opposite. How many of us have seen in the gym that coaches will say, well, just add more weight to it. If she adds more weight to it, she can get lower. This tends to be I've seen it more as a female thing. And then they actually can squat below parallel, but then you ask them to lay on their back and bring their knees up to their chest, and they're actually not able to. So they're just compensating their way through that range of motion, but their actual joint doesn't have the flexibility to allow them to move like that yet. So just kind of an interesting concept, even thinking about what does that look like and what compensations are you creating to achieve whatever the goal is. Is the goal to squat to parallel? What are the goals here? And then how are you compensating? Do you truly have all the pieces that you need to be able to do that?
Yeah. So very similar to the dancer example, but more applicable to your CrossFit athlete, right? Where we're trying to perform squats, whether that be front squats, back squats, thrusters, whatever, right? And yeah, that actually is an excellent example, because when you're doing a regular air squat, you still have weight, right? That's associated with yourself. And as you go down the squat, you may actually be able to get below parallel. But when you're on your back, if you can't get your knees and everything else in a position that shows that 90-degree angle, you inherently don't have the flexibility, right, to perform an air squat appropriately. Insane.
Yeah, and then people get all these like hip pinchings and all these crazy things, and they're like, I don't know what I did. And I'm like, oh, I do.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. And a really good example. Speaking about the air squat, so Ido Portal, a movement specialist, as I know you know, but our audience, he's a movement specialist, and he actually has a very primal way of teaching movement. And he says that the squat is actually a resting position. And when I first heard this, I was like, yeah, right, dude. Like, I'm not resting when I'm in a squat. I feel like I'm under high amounts of stress when I'm in a squat position. It absolutely blew my mind. So I'm wondering what your opinion is on how humans have lost movement patterns like this over time.
So I think really Gray Cook was one of the first people. So he was one of the creators of the functional movement system, which is a system that I use as a lot of my baseline screening and testing because it's the most studied movement screens out there. So I usually start with that, and listening to him speak, he spoke on this a lot, and the correlations that he's seen with us losing as a society squat as a resting position, and then this correlation with injury rates and obesity is really crazy. So the resting position, so the shooting position of a deep squat was actually taken out of the military standards back in the late 1960s, early 1970s. So they used to do that for general marksmanship, and they took that away. And so when they took that away, then also society started losing it, because the reason that they took it away is because no one could do it. None of their soldiers were able to get into that position anymore, and they were able to 20 years before that. So what had changed society-wise that really was causing this change for us in our joint abilities, in our abilities to rest in this position? And we saw this big correlation in a change of fitness and health that followed very soon after that. So there's this prediction, and I believe very firmly in it, obviously just from my background, that we lost the ability to do resting squat full movement patterns, and then we lost our health. So in order to fully restore our health and our society again, we have to restore these resting positions. So yes, I very, very firmly believe that the squat is a resting position. Now I'm with you. Like, I do not rest comfortably down there. I have to hold on to a plate and get some counterbalance. But I really do recommend that people spend time in a relaxed squat. It is a neurodevelopmental position. So if you watch how children grow up, first they're able to actually breathe, which is a prerequisite for all athletes out there. You should actually be able to breathe properly. You should be able to lift your head up. Babies can do that, within 2 months of coming out of the womb. And then you need to be able to crawl. And then the next thing that they go to after crawling is they start coming up into this kneeling and squatting position, and they just hang out there. They move toys up and down off of tables using it. And then, very, very quickly, I would say even now in society, 7, 8 years old, that's pretty much gone. We lose this ability because we don't use it as a society. And this is where squatty potties, coming back to our indigenous roots, so looking at indigenous cultures, they are still squatting. And why is it that we as a culture have lost that?
Wow. So I'm weaker than a baby, essentially.
Yeah. And you shouldn't be doing anything more than what an 8-month-old baby should be doing. You're not safe. You're at risk for injury.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective. I'm wondering, so is there any anthropometrical pattern in the body, like too long of femurs or people with a posterior pelvic tilt, that shouldn't be trying to get below parallel ever? Or does everyone have the prerequisite sort of anthropometrics to be able to squat below 90 degrees safely? What's sort of your opinion on that? Because I've seen both camps here.
Mm-hmm. Me too. I think it depends on the person that's standing in front of you, but I would like to say as a general theme that everyone should be able to squat below parallel comfortable and get into a resting position. Because again, every baby comes up that way. So yes, we grow over time, but I don't think it's the growth over time that causes us to lose it. I think it's the lack of using it. And so then our anatomy doesn't adapt along with it as we're growing. So I think there are modifications. Not everyone should squat the same. So I think the people that are in the camp that are like, your toe should be out 23 degrees and no more. And,
that doesn't make sense.
Your knees have to be tracked over your second toe, and all of these very set criteria. Your hips need to sit back at this angle at this time. That doesn't work for everybody. Mm-hmm. But looking through, as a human species, we haven't evolved since we used to squat around fires, and since we used to use the bathroom in holes in the ground. So how did we as a whole entire population of people, as the human race, how were we able to do those things then? We had differences. We had height differences. We had femur differences. You go back and you dissect bodies back then, they look very similar to how bodies do now as far as their actual anatomy, but they were still able to do that. And I just believe it was an adaptation that they maintained over time, where we have felt as a species now that it's better for us to get rid of it. So it's easier or more beneficial to us to be able to stay in a seated posture for longer, because that gives us that success that we need. Where prior, whenever we were hunting, it was very safe for us to be down in a deep squat and to be able to then crawl through grass and hang out in that squat for a long time and then be ready to pounce or be ready to pull back a bow, whatever it might be, or just to be able to use the bathroom. That was a requirement for them. Well, it's not for us anymore. So why do we need it? But we need it because our heritage, our biological nature requires that.
Right. Okay, so 2 things here. One, when I went to a village in Belize, I had to take a poop in a hole several times because I was there for 2 weeks. And it sucked. It was so terrible. It was like a stone. It was like a hole, and there were some stones around it with a hole. You looked in there, you couldn't see the bottom. and I had to poop there for 2 weeks. I just thought I'd mention that as a good laugh. And 2, are we evolving out? I know you already mentioned this, but do you think in 500 years people are still going to be able to squat effectively? So like, take for example, we used to be quadrupeds, right? Like we used to walk on all fours. Now we're walking on all twos, and no one's like, hey, you need to walk on all fours. Like you don't have mobility, right? But is that where we're heading with the squat? Or do you think that one day it's going to be obsolete based on the anatomical positions that we can't get in, how we're adapting?
So kind of going to what you just said, though, is that so we used to be quadruped, right?
Yeah.
And now we don't do that at all. Look at the back spine history now that we have that we never had before, and look at like rotator cuff injuries and their success. And I believe that it's because we don't get any joint approximation in our shoulders. That's why almost every athlete that I program for, I program them to crawl every single day, different variations, different positions, because I think we need joint approximation. So our shoulder joint looks just like our hip joint, because we used to need to use all of that, and not in open chain activity, but actually in closed chain. So meaning that your hand needs to be fixed on the ground in order for that ball and socket joint to get stability. So that being said, I think we still do need to do it. I think we see massive changes because people are not in these different positions. They're not using them frequently. All we do is sit or stand. Those are the like main things that we do. Unless, I mean, obviously we all as athletes are training, but then the question is what does your day-to-day life look like? Again, I mean, Tyler Pasek and I had this conversation, and he was like, if you could say one thing that would change people's lives, what would you do? And I said, wake up and crawl to the bathroom every morning. And he was like, are you serious right now? I'm like, yeah. If you crawl to your morning pee, like you'll just do and feel better.
Butt naked.
Yes,
right?
For sure.
That's
really
the way.
like get back to your like roots here. But yeah, so I do think that we're going to get away from the squat in not even 500 years. I think in 50 years, I think majority of our population will not be able to squat. I fear very much that our society is going to look like the movie WALL-E very, very, very quickly if we don't get a handle on what is causing all of these health concerns, because the solutions that we've had up to this point, they're not working across the board. And even when you look at the athletic population, there's still a good amount of athletes out there that really are still not moving well. They're just very good at performing.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Yeah, I'm just imagining like what my wife would say if she watched me crawl in the middle of the night, pitch dark, butt naked into our bathroom.
Can you please just set up a camera? You know how they set up those like spouse cams and then they like turn off the Super Bowl or something to videotape them? Like, can you do one for your wife and then just crawl to the
You just see the eyes like, okay.
Like, who am I married to?
What's he doing? Oh my gosh. Oh man. Well, speaking of top performers and athletes, some of them, at least in my experience, they move extremely well. I mean, compared to me, like I look in the mirror, look at videos of myself, and I'm like, man, what the heck? I thought I looked like Rich Froning, but I don't. Until I see the video, then I know. It's extremely humbling. Movement's extremely humbling for me. And a lot of the very high level athletes I know that you work with, that I work with, and that we see on the CrossFit Games this past weekend tend to move extremely well, especially in movements that have a lot of mobility requirements associated. So I'm wondering, what is sort of the connection between mobility and performance, if there's a relation, and does it affect work capacity? Does it affect gymnastics? Does it affect Olympic lifting? And how does it affect overall performance?
I think the biggest thing that you're going to see, especially with these high level athletes where mobility starts to make a huge difference, is in the master's level. So at the master's level, you start to see people that really haven't taken care of their mobility for a really long time. I truly believe at the lower levels, you watch some of these athletes move, and at least, especially with, again, this is not like a critique on any athlete whatsoever, because I have things that I do very, very poorly. We all do. But I look and all the athletes that I screen. So traveling last year, we picked up a lot of different athletes. We traveled with them to sanctionals, and then following after sanctionals, after we got to know them, we would sponsor them and give them assessments, kind of go through and see what we could capitalize on. Majority of the athletes that I've worked with that I've screened are not able to, I would say probably 60% or more, are not able to do a proper overhead squat facing the wall with their toes forward. But they can overhead squat tons of weight, lots of intensity. They can do all of these things. So when I think about mobility, I don't think about it as being directly related to performance, but rather indirectly related to performance. So the absolute, like, you program for people all the time. What is the worst phone call from an athlete where you know that things are going to get massively derailed?
If they have an injury?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So if you want to get worse at your sport, and this is actually Pure Physio, Matt Stevens, this is something that he said first, and I just picked up on it and totally agree with it. But if you want to get worse at your sport, get injured. And it's because it takes you out for so long, and it changes the way you move, and it changes the confidence in the way that you move. And even if it's just little tweaks over time. So even if it's like, oh, I tweaked my hamstring, I'm out for, 7 to 10 days. That creates huge gaps in your training program. So if that happens 4 or 5 times, oh, I tweaked my shoulder, oh, I tweaked my hamstring, oh, I tweaked my ankle. And this is happening to these professional athletes all the time. And then, their coaches are changing their programming. And if you look at, 52 weeks in a year, you take out competition weeks and changes there, then you take out actual rest time that they truly need. And now you take out maybe 4 to 5 weeks with just little tweaks that you have to modify programming. Think about we talk about the 1%. Think about the 1% you could get back if none of those little tweaks happened. Or if those little tweaks went from being 6 in a season to being 1 in a season. Or you still had 6, but you were able to recover in 2 days rather than, 7 days to 2 weeks. And so I think that that's the biggest correlation. Number one is how consistent can you be with your programming, and how much of your programming are you fighting through an injury, tweaks, pain as you're going through. So you're just not able to work at that maximal effort. That's really the biggest correlation that I've found when it relates to it. And it's hard to explain that to people or to motivate an athlete like, hey, you got to take time for this, unless they are injured. And that's why whenever we program for people and do their mobility, we try to just directly correlate it to a warm-up that they're just going to do along with their training program, rather than it being something separate. And then it's always we try to make it a game. So we try to always checking in on people and looking to see what movement patterns improved. So they have a gauge for performance, like, hey, could you overhead squat facing the wall today? And they're so competitive that they want to be able to do it. It ticks them off that they can't. So then they're motivated to stick with their programming. So we try to kind of correlate those and go through there. But even the top athletes that we see, which was kind of your original question, we see some pattern changes. I see whenever they're moving things that don't look as well as I would expect, or especially if they just kind of pan through when people are warming up. You can see a lot of different compensation patterns, different things. And my question is never if they're going to perform well or not. Of course they are. They're the most elite athletes that we have on the floor. They're going to do great. How long are they going to do great for? And what do they look like in 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s? Is that sustainable for them? I want all of my people to be able to say, I am an athlete, not for 2 years, not for 4 years, but for 40 years. And I want to be able to give that to them in different aspects. So I think we can sacrifice some things for performance, for compensation, or for competition. But then I think we always have to come back to our roots, and we have to find time in our programming to be able to do that.
Yes, absolutely. I think that one thing I tell all of my programming athletes and my nutrition athletes that ask me like, hey, like, can I make it to the CrossFit Games? Can I make it to a sanctional? And I'm like, there are two types of athletes that I've seen not make it. One, the ones that get injured, and two, the ones that just stop competing in the sport. They're like, nope, they either have some ego depletion issues or some other issues surrounding why they decide that they're going to stop, doing CrossFit or being competitive in the sport. Those people, and then also athletes that get injured. Those are the only two people I've seen not make it to the level that they wanted to make it to. So obviously mobility is directly related in that. And then mobility is also directly related to movement standards, right? Like if you can't lock out a ring dip because you don't have the mobility requirements, then you get no rep. Your performance is ultimately going to suffer, right?
Right.
When it comes to like, let's say Olympic lifts and things like that, how does mobility play a part in really recruiting the maximum amount of muscle mass, right? To lift the most weight, for example?
Yeah, so I think mobility also relates to recruiting those motor units. So essentially, how much of the bulk of your hamstring can you turn on at the same time for a pull? How much of your lats can you turn on at the same time in order to complete that rep or to complete multiple reps? So when we start talking about recruitment of motor units, what that means is that you have to have a full connection signal from your brain to whatever muscle it is that you're wanting to work, to the surrounding joints, and then back up again. So that loop has to be full. What I find is that when you're lacking full mobility, especially in your joints, but in your muscles too, that brain is not getting that full signal. So it's like racing your car with the parking brake on. It's not going to go anywhere. Like it's going to move, but it's not going to do what you want it to do because you're not able to fully recruit the engine because the brake is on. And so when we open up mobility, now we can recruit more motor units at once because we're getting a full signal. And then we're able to lift more, lift better. Your form improves, obviously, just like what you just said about, just being able to lock out a ring dip or to lock out a snatch. Like to lock out a full snatch in the bottom of a squat takes a lot of mobility, ankle mobility, hip mobility, spine mobility, shoulder mobility, wrist mobility. It takes all of it. And then also obviously the stability to be able to do all of that as well. And so when we develop these patterns over time, then those things get exponentially better. But if any part of that is lacking, it's just going to pull everything back. So I think the easiest way to think about it is that parking brake on. Will your car still drive? 100%. Just make some funny noises and probably doesn't go as fast as you want. But you can keep driving with your parking brake on. It's just a matter of how long will the car last that way.
Yeah. No, that's a really great analogy. I think, definitely our body is like this system of, it's geometry. Like it's levers and all over the place, right? And like if it's not in a specific position, it's going to be hard to pull the lever. Right? It's all geometry. It's all angles. Our body's just a mixture of triangles. And yeah, if you can utilize the most amount of muscle mass to lift the most weight because you have the prerequisite mobility, I think that you're going to outperform other people,
Yes. And the same goes for work capacity. I know that was part of your other question too. And then I'll touch on the gymnastics part. Work capacity is about the same thing. So if you are able to breathe properly because you have full mobility in your diaphragm and your abdomen and in your rib cage and in your mid back, then now all of a sudden your work capacity massively increases. I would also say that mobility, improving your work capacity, is how we see people come back after an injury, and they come back better. If you have a surgery or you have a massive injury where something's been torn, your actual anatomy is not better than it was before. But what happened is that your mobility, your flexibility, your stability, and your movement patterns have improved because you've worked through, again, a developmental sequence and lots of progressions, hopefully with some really good rehab people. And we see people come back better than what they did before. And a lot of that is mindset and mobility, functional patterning, which opens up your brain more. So you're actually able to connect back with your body more, which opens up that work capacity. And so we'll see that a lot, but I think the parking brake kind of goes with that as well. If you're able to breathe, if you're able to get your central nervous system just to chill out, you're going to massively improve and see all these incremental gains that maybe you weren't expecting, or maybe even your actual anatomy doesn't have the same capacity as the person standing next to you because they've never torn their hamstring or something along those lines.
Yeah, that's really cool. And the work capacity thing is extremely fascinating, especially for CrossFit athletes. I think that it's all really connected, right? So like if you can, in a way, the way that I'm thinking about it is if you can perform a particular movement like a snatch in the most efficient way, right? Because you have unlimited mobility restrictions, let's say, you're able to recruit more muscle fibers. You're burning less energy per rep because you're more efficient in that particular movement because you have the mobility requirements. And if you're burning less energy per rep, right, you're able to do more reps faster than someone else that doesn't have those mobility requirements. So nutrition is related here. Mobility is related here. You know, all the energy systems are related here. Obviously, we already talked about how the brain is directly connected, right? It is movement in a way, like you cannot move without your brain. So I love how everything's really like global, you know, and it's not just one thing that pertains to excelling in the CrossFit space, especially because we know CrossFit is such a diagnostic tool for mobility and how we really think about movement and stuff like that. So I think that that's really awesome. Now, one thing that I do see a lot of athletes doing, I don't know who they got it from, but they're doing it all over the place, and they're either not doing it correctly, or maybe they don't even need to be doing it because they haven't been assessed properly. But I see a lot of athletes using like lacrosse balls and foam rollers. Is there benefit to this as it pertains to mobility? And maybe there can be, maybe not. But if there is or isn't, what is the reason as to why someone should be using a foam roller and a lacrosse ball?
Is there a benefit? And I'm also going to throw in these percussion machines in there as well. So there is a time and a place for everything. I'm not saying that all of it is bad, but I would say 90% of it is. When we look at the amount of time that people are spending on foam rolls and lacrosse balls, it's insane. Most of these athletes are spending, like professional athletes that I've started working with, they were spending up to 3 to 4 hours a week doing lacrosse ball and foam rolling. Imagine if they just spent that time breathing. They'd probably be a better athlete, in my opinion. I'm like, why are you doing that? And it's because they feel tight. So people get this feeling of tightness, which is just a signal from your brain. So the feeling of tightness, the feeling of pain are sensations from your brain. It has absolutely nothing to do with what's going on in your body until you get it assessed. You do not know what's happening there and why you're getting those feelings. That's why having a really great physical therapist, that's why having a really great chiropractor, there's really good orthopedic massage therapists. There are really good movement coaches that have personal training backgrounds, CrossFit coaching backgrounds, these different things. So until you get somebody that has this great background in movement that's actually assessing it from the very baseline stuff, you do not know if you need to be doing these things. They're really beneficial if you have a true flexibility issue. they can be beneficial. So lacrosse balls, if you want to pin a tissue and stretch it, that can be really effective. So a lot of people, you'll see this like piriformis. So let's say someone checks their hip rotation. They actually don't have full hip rotation. Then we might come onto their piriformis and take a lacrosse ball. And actually, I prefer the tune-up fitness balls. If anybody's ever heard of Jill Miller, she worked with Kelly Starrett for a long time. She has a whole group but also a book called The Role Model. And it's excellent. And her balls are very soft and much more suited to tissue. I think especially in the CrossFit world, but most extreme sports worlds, we think harder is better, so that it should hurt while we're doing it. And it's actually the opposite is true. So when something hurts, then we actually recoil and we can lose more mobility over time. And so that's the first thing on kind of lacrosse balls. Pinning and stretching is great. If you have a true flexibility issue, you should be testing that joint, doing the lacrosse ball, and then going back and testing it. Did it actually get better? I use a foam roll for nothing except for to squeeze between people's knees, between people's hands, because if you squeeze anything between your hands, between your knees, or the long foam rolls, if you put them on the top of your foot and then your hand and do single leg RDLs, it's a really great movement performance standard that helps them activate their core without actually having to think about it. It's crazy. It will open up people's mobility insane amount, and all it's doing is getting your core to activate without you having to think about it. So that really deep core muscles, a lot of people, they're turned off. They're actually not capable of turning them on their own volitionally whenever they want to, or even unconsciously or subconsciously, I guess should be the better word. And so these are really great tools to be able to use that. I don't foam roll at all anymore. I think it's a waste of time. The same with the percussion stuff. There is some evidence that shows that you can move around essentially like a lymph or swelling type fluid that comes in that gets sluggish in muscles and then can cause that tissue soreness over time. But again, even tissue soreness, even this DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, all these pieces of causing soreness like lactic acid, those have all been proven wrong. So we're still creating tools and devices and telling people to use them on a standard that's been proven wrong by research, that's actually not why people feel sore. And so I think we just need to switch our thinking, but it's a society thing. So people think that they feel better because they've gotten this tissue to move, or they've given it some compression or vibration and it feels better. But really it hasn't done much for you performance wise. So I think you could spend those 3-4 hours way more efficiently and actually get a performance gain out of it.
Awesome. That's going to be a sound bite for sure. Because there are a lot of athletes doing this, and I think some of it's sort of out of boredom. Hey, let me just get on this. It's going to like loosen you up or something. But I agree with you, at least from the research that I've seen and some of the other physical therapists that I've talked with or to, a lot of it is not really as useful as everyone makes it out to be. So excellent. So that really brings us to what should someone do when they are having mobility restrictions, whether they're an Olympic weightlifter or a CrossFit athlete, and what are some of the tools and ideas that they can use to take a global approach to their movement and mobility?
I think the first thing is you've got to get an assessment. And one of the things that I hate is this battle between all these different professionals. Everybody, feels like everyone's encroaching on their territory. And at the same time, I look around and I see, as a society as a whole, we're getting less and less healthy. As an athlete population as a whole, our injury rates climb every single year. Our surgery rates climb every single year. So I do not care who you see. Go see anyone your heart desires if they actually are screening and assessing you. So when you walk in someplace, whether it's a coach that you're working with, whether it's a physical therapist, whether it's a massage therapist, whether it's a chiropractor, or whether it's an MD, they should be doing some sort of movement assessment on you. they should be putting their hands on you in some way to check how you're moving and to be able to look how you can move, kind of like we talked about with the gymnast. How can you move actively and how can you move passively, someone else moving you through? So these are really important tools to be looking at. Also, every single person should be looking at how you breathe. That's a prerequisite to do anything else. So if you are working with someone and you're coming in with pain or tightness and they're not checking to see how you're breathing, typically you're going to be in what we call a high threshold pattern, which means that you're going to be breathing with your chest if you have this feeling of pain or tightness or you have an injury or a tweak going on. And then also what goes along with this is these big muscles will be really tight. So your hamstrings will be overworking, your quads will be overworking, your six-pack abs will be overworking, your big backstrap muscles in your back will be overworking, your traps, and you'll see this global pattern, but you can't reset that pattern if you're not resetting your breathing. So those are the biggest things. And then they also should never be telling you to move or to train through pain or, again, to get out your foam roll and lacrosse ball and like make it hurt. What we've learned about pain in the research in the last 5 to 10 years is that we know nothing except for every single person's pain experience is different. So you and I could right now take off running, do a cut, and both of us could tear our ACL in the exact same moment. The temperature could be the same. How everything happens could be exactly the same. How you would recover and how I would recover would be different. How your body would handle pain and how mine would be completely different. It's not based on your athleticism. It's not based on how strong you are. Nothing. It is the most bizarre experience that happens in your brain. And so the biggest thing that the research has said when it's found nothing else is that people should not be working through true pain. Obviously, with some of our listeners, as you come into competition, sometimes there's not a choice. We make that sacrifice and we know that things are going to come from that. But in a day-to-day training facility, 90% of the time, people should not be training or working through pain. The goal of your physical therapist or chiropractor should not be to make you hurt. That's not the goal at all. So I think that those are the biggest things. So get an assessment with somebody. Make sure that they're actually checking everything. If you guys ever need anything, I guess this is kind of a plug for mobility athletes, but we triage all of our patients. So I am only licensed in 3 states for physical therapy. So if you come to me with an injury and I screen you out and I'm like, you need actual hands-on physical therapy, you need something in person, I will sit down and I will call physical therapists on your behalf based upon their credentials, talk to them about you, ask them some questions and see how they treat and what they're doing to see if they're a good fit. We also have a group called Physios in CrossFit. There's also a group MDs in CrossFit that I just found out about from Physios in CrossFit a couple of days ago. Those are going to be great resources for you to look and see who's in those groups and then reach out to people that are in them and say, hey, could you help me find somebody that would assist me in finding someone that's an expert in my sport and that's also a movement expert that's really going to look at those things. So that would be the first things that I would do. Also on the functional movement system, so functionalmovementsystems.com, there is a provider search area. So you can type in your zip code and it will show you. And then Functional Movement System has chiropractors, physical therapists, strength coaches, personal trainers on it. So you can find the person that best fits you and talk to them and then kind of lead into a pattern that way.
Yeah, that's awesome. A lot of great resources there. And I think as we end the podcast talking about pain, I think we definitely have to have sort of a part 2 here where we talk about pain because it's so complicated. Pain is so complicated. I mean, they have so many different types of pain, phantom pain, and all this other stuff, right, that we didn't even get into. So this was awesome, Nicole. I really appreciate you coming on and talking all about mobility today and giving some of our listeners some insight into what they can be doing better and how important mobility is for them if they're going to be a competitive athlete or if they're just going to, continue to live a healthy life. So thank you so much for coming on today. Please tell everyone if they're, where they can find you on Instagram and where they can find your website and all those other things so that they can reach out to you directly if they have more questions.
Awesome. Yeah, you guys can always email me. Nicole@mobilityathletes.com. Everyone's going to think I'm insane right now, but you can also text me. So it is 618-553-6798. We live in a world of like, it takes 25 million years and different emails and Instagrams to be able to find somebody. Like, just shoot me a text. I don't care.
I like it.
Tell me who you are. And we're at Mobility Athletes on Instagram. We also have a Facebook group, Mobility Athletes. So you guys are welcome to join that. We do a 5-day squat challenge in there 3 times a year. So you guys can join in, kind of see what we're about. And if you guys need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. Or if there's something that you guys would love to see, Justin's going to be on our podcast. I think it's airing next week, depending on probably the week before this one airs. But if you guys want to check out the Mobility Athletes podcast to kind of see the people that we collaborate with and the other guests that we have on as well. And if you guys have any suggestions, always reach out and let us know how we can continue to improve and serve you guys to the best of our abilities.
Awesome, Nicole. Awesome. Borat.
I do not know Bull Rat.
Borat, it's a movie. Oh, man.
Yeah, I don't know it.
All right. Well, that didn't work. All right, guys. Hope you had a good laugh. Hope you learned a lot about mobility. Me and Nicole are out. We'll chat with you next time. Thanks for tuning in.